Hello, everyone. This is Stacey Crowley. I'm the Vice President of External Affairs at the California Independent System Operator. Welcome to another Energy Matters conversation. Our topic today is the partial solar eclipse that passed through California and much of the Southwest on the morning of October 14th, and what that meant for the reliability of our electric grid. With more and more solar energy generating electricity for the grid in California and throughout the West, even a partial solar eclipse like the one we experienced in October has the potential to affect reliability. And today we want to talk about what it takes to keep the power flowing when the system loses and then gains fairly quickly so much solar capacity in such a short period of time. We have great experts today participating in today's Energy Matters conversation. They include Amber Motley, the ISO's Director of Short-Term Forecasting, Jessica Stewart, Senior Meteorologist on Amber's team, and Brian Murray, Manager of our Market Operations Coordination team. So let me start with Amber. Amber, tell me when your team started to plan for this event and what did that all entail?
Yeah, perfect. So at the beginning of the year, in January, we did note that we were going to have another eclipse move through the western footprint in California. So with that, we started reaching out to some of the key vendors providing the solar and wind forecasts just so they had awareness on that as well. But we didn't really heavily start ramping up into the preparations until more in the spring timeframe. Before we headed into the summer, we had some detailed conversations with the vendors to make sure that they would be able to run some of the simulations that they did in the 2017 eclipse. And then we really started heavily coordinating with everyone, the vendors coming in, as well as others in the July, beginning of August timeframe, as at that point in time, the eclipse was a couple months out. So what did that mean? So we developed a cross-divisional team within the ISO with customer experience, operations, IT, forecasting, market experts to make sure that we all had a list of the detailed tasks, deliverables, key dates, and deadlines. Everybody had ownership of those, and then we had a lot of close coordination with some of the critical vendors, stakeholders, the gas supply, the reliability coordinator footprint, and it was really critical to have those cross-divisional teams set up within the ISO as well with our partners across the West, so that we could have a full timeline of all the tasks that needed to be met and enough time to plan all of the outreaches and the coordinations to occur as we came up closer to the eclipse.
Thank you, Amber. I know that the path of the eclipse heavily affected the Southwest, which is where a lot of the solar occurred. And I'm so glad to hear that there was a lot of outreach going on between you and a lot of the utilities throughout the West, including those in the Southwest that saw that probably most severely. That's great. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica. Jessica, even this last eclipse was what they called an annular or partial eclipse. It had potentially more impact on the grid than the full eclipse we had in 2017. Can you talk about that and what challenges we faced this time and why?
Sure. So yeah, this eclipse, we only saw the sun partially obscured by the moon. It wasn't completely obscured like the eclipse in 2017. But the big difference from this one compared to the one in 2017 was the amount of growth we've had in both our grid scale solar and our behind the meter solar capacity. So in 2017, we only had about 10,000 megawatts of grid scale solar. This year, we had over 16,500 megawatts. And then our behind the meter solar grew from about 5,600 megawatts in 2017 to almost 14,500 megawatts in 2023. So quite a large growth in both of those two areas. We've also seen that our EIM entities have grown. We had 4 entities in 2017, and in 2023, we've got 2021. And then we also have started offering reliability coordination services as well. So in addition to our growth within the ISO, we also expanded across the West. So that led to a more West-wide impact instead of just within California. So what that meant for us, we had more coordination internally, as Amber talked about, with all the different teams throughout the ISO. And we also had more conversations externally with our EIM participants, our weather and renewable providers, our behind the meter forecasters and vendors, and then also resource owners and throughout RC West. So that way they knew how to prepare on their side and then what to expect from us ahead of and during the eclipse as well.
Great, thanks. A lot of good preparation happening there. Let's turn it over to Brian and the operations. So the ISO is part of this larger regional footprint today, as noted already. And so we were in close contact with our stakeholders and market partners to make sure everyone was getting through the eclipse without power being disrupted. Can you talk about that work? And really, I'll start with Brian and then and we'll turn it over to others as well.
Sure, Stacey. Yeah, so the outreach, the coordination was really key in our success as we moved into real time. But honestly, the work that Amber's team, the short-term forecasting team, did in terms of the high impact studies and analysis, so and we were able to prepare for kind of what we saw as the worst case scenario in terms of the maximum ramp that we would need to support the solar eclipse. And so with that information, we did a lot of cross communication with the market participants, with the WEAM entities, with the IOUs, with the gas supply companies. So we did a lot of that outreach early, well in advance of the solar eclipse. So we're all on the same page of what the impacts were and what we were going to do in terms of setups in our day ahead market leading into real time. In talking specifically about the day ahead market, that's really what created the high level of confidence, because our forecast by that time frame is pretty honed in on what the expectations were for cloud cover, load forecast, the temperatures, those type of things. And then our day ahead setup really allowed us to ensure that we had enough energy capacity on to meet the demand throughout the solar eclipse, but also obviously our key concern was the ramp support that was needed. So in real time, we had that great day ahead setup. So we were confident going into it. In real time, we had some strategies as well. This goes back to the coordination we did with the scheduling coordinators, for example, the variable energy resources. It was super critical to have those resources follow their dispatch operating target versus producing as capable, because we wanted to have synchronization, right? Like a dancing partner for those resources, those solar resources that are being impacted by the eclipse. We needed to have a dancing partner with them, with our traditional generation fleet, and including some of the newer technologies with the batteries. But those were some of our bigger concerns and challenges in real time. Were just ensuring that we had the energy and ramp capacity, but the day ahead market really set us up well. And the reason we had a good day ahead setup really is a kudos to Amber and team on what we predicted, what was predicted, what our setups were for that for both the day ahead and real time markets.
That's great. And I should, before we jump to Amber and Jessica, Brian, how, in terms of operations, how did this eclipse compare to the one in 2017 in terms of the operational challenges? Maybe you sort of address that.
Yeah, I think the one in 2017 was in August, right? This one obviously in mid-October. But as Jessica talked about earlier, with the growth on grid scale solar and behind the meter, we knew these ramp rates were going to be much higher than what we saw in 2017, just by the sheer volume of resources that we have now. But August and summer, we also have a lot of other concerns. Typically, in the summers are typically a more challenging time. And I think in August, Amber and Jessica correct me, but I believe that eclipse was a little bit later. I think that was like a start of around 9 a.m. and went to closer to noon, if I remember correctly. But but the big concern was that ramp. It was making sure that we had a good diversified generation fleet that could match the demand as those solar resources were being impacted. So,
yeah, thanks. So let me turn over to Jessica, and similar question to Brian, and just in terms of the kind of regional impact and the coordination that it took. Can you just talk about that from your perspective?
Sure, yeah. So as the energy meteorologist, I tend to be in close contact with our renewable vendors. So the vendors that provide us our solar and wind forecasts. So it's really important that we knew that both those forecasts would include the eclipse impact from the day ahead horizon all the way down to the RTD forecast. So that way operations knew as soon as they could what the impact and expected market results would be due to that loss of solar. So that was one of the primary contacts I had. I was also in contact with our EIMs. Many of our EIMs supply their own renewable forecasts to us. So we needed to do outreach to them to make sure that all of their renewable forecasts as well would also include the eclipse impact in there, because we wanted to make sure that all of our entities were having that loss of solar included in their forecast. And so the market would see that. Another important discussion we had was with our weather vendors. Obviously, the temperature throughout the day was impacted by the eclipse with that loss of sun for a little bit in the morning hours. So we wanted to discuss with them and make sure that the temperature forecast that we received for the rest of the day would include the eclipse impact in there. And we did actually have one project that went live earlier this year in May that did provide us with a weather forecast that would include the eclipse impact in there. So we were able to use that and rely a little bit more on that and use that forecast when we were considering what the load might look like the rest of the day after the eclipse, since the temperature was impacted for the rest of the day as well.
That's great, Jessica. And it sounds like, in Amber, I know you're looking long term at how to continue to improve the forecasting capabilities and accuracy in the company. And so just from your perspective, having these tools is probably critical every day, but on days like that, especially so. So what are your perspectives on sort of the broad impact, both in our footprint as well as around the West?
Yeah, no, I think that, Jessica and Brian covered many of the different critical points, right? That coordination with the inputs, those weather inputs are really, really critical when you're handling extreme situations, right? And I'd put the solar eclipse on the weather forecasting side as extreme, but in the case that it is predictable, right? We do know what the sun obscuration is going to be like, which really does help us versus a partly cloudy day. But some of those tools that you see in one of them that Jessica's mentioning, which is the high resolution rapid refresh model, it's one of the only American models that includes smoke. It's the only one that includes the eclipse impact for temperature as well. And that's the tool we really had to lean on during some of these scenarios to be able to ensure that those forecasts could account for temperature. One of the lessons learned we had in 2017 was how big the temperature was impacted from the eclipse. October is a little different because October, you don't change as much temperature as you do in August timeframe, but that was a big lesson learned from 2017 that we took forward to this one. The other big coordination component that we did throughout was really talking about the market mechanisms, right? And what we were going to use in the toolbox as we prepared for the eclipse. And that was really a lot of stakeholder discussions. We took a lot of the lessons learned from 2017, but we also expanded them to how the market has evolved and the different tools that the market has from 2017 to now. For example, the assisted energy transfer, the AET opt-in. That's a new tool that happened earlier this summer that was available for the whole Western footprint to be able to utilize in their toolbox as they prepared for the eclipse this time around. But really highlighting, like Jessica said, the importance of the entities that are submitting their own forecasts, having the eclipse and the impact, having the conversations with their vendors, and make sure that once the market saw it, we saw it holistically across the West so that the optimization of the transfers and everything could really account for that. And then we could be good dancing partners, as Brian referenced, right? And that time period went through us all differently. right? So we had different times of max impact across the Western footprint, which is really a benefit and a diversity that we have. And it allowed, now that you have the market seeing all that, you see that dancing partner go back and forth on the transfers as we go through the overall eclipse. And I think talking about those market mechanisms and that toolbox really helped everybody be prepared for that day.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was watching various news outlets, and NASA had some filming in various areas, Albuquerque, and I think all the way to San Diego and elsewhere. And it was just interesting to see that time difference and what was happening across the West differently. So absolutely essential to think about that diversity, both in terms of being helpful, but just in terms of planning for it as well. Brian, anything else you want to add? You did talk about the ramp and how that has really been, I think, not just in this solar eclipse, but in our daily activities, has just been the focus of a lot of effort during the transition to clean energy resources. Anything else you want to mention with regards to the ramp and how this eclipse sort of, we had to manage that ramp at a different time of day than normal?
Right. Yeah, I think we covered that pretty good. I think some things that I'd like to touch on a little bit more is probably like our battery fleet. You know, when we talk about comparisons from 2017 to where we are today, you know, our battery fleet's around 6,500 megawatts capacity. A large volume of that battery capacity, they do get a lot of ancillary service awards from the day ahead. So those, you know, with our regulation requirements. So having fast-moving resources that are positioned well because of the market is seeing, obviously the day ahead is looking hourly and it's looking for all 24 hours. And when we get into real time, you've got the stuck market that's looking out, you know, 4.5 hours, and the HASP is looking out 2 hours and getting into real time. So it's making resource commitment decisions based off of, again, the forecast that is so critical, the bids and schedules that come in from the resources. And those batteries, I just wanted to point out that they were a huge player in our success as well. The way they performed was really well. Following dispatch, they're charging, they're discharging at different phases of that eclipse period, and their responses, you know, that their performance response was really good. So I just wanted to point that out in comparison to 2017. We didn't have near that size of battery fleet back then.
Yes, key element of our success here. That's great. I know you all plan to publish a post-eclipse analysis and lessons learned, just like you did back in 2017, somewhere in the December timeframe here of this year. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the key items that led to this success. Batteries, probably one of them as well. Anything you can add and what we might expect in this post-event analysis?
Sure, I can start that off, Stacey. We do have, from lessons learned, I think we definitely have a lot of successes to mirror on future events like this. The coordination, the collaboration, the impact analysis. I feel like the impact analysis still to this day, I love to give kudos for that, because to me that was really helpful for operations and not just California ISO BA. You could see how much the WEAM entity BAs also appreciated that analysis. But as far as things that we could do better, I think for us at the ISO, I talked a lot about the day ahead and how important that is. There are some things that I would like us to be able to do in a day ahead simulation, where we could simulate more of the day ahead market, you know, 7 days in advance of the event. You know, when this is a known event coming, it would be awesome if we had an environment that we could bring in all the inputs that we expect for the day plus 1 day ahead market, but really truly simulate that in days in advance. We did do some things because we didn't have a true simulation that far out. we had some experts on the operations side. Michael Martin, going to give him a plug on this. He was able to do a lot of things that validated the bids and schedules from the solar resources up to 7 days in advance, and verify that those bids and schedules were matching the forecasts. It's super important that they were matching that solar eclipse profile. And we actually had to do some outreach to some scheduling coordinators, because we saw where some specific scheduling coordinators were just submitting kind of their base solar forecast or solar bids and schedules. So they made those adjustments well in advance of our day plus one run, again, which led to a lot of our success in real time. So that's one area. I think in other things in real time, we use like the battery ED tool. We've got the OI groups, which is the operating instructions for the VER resources, specifically for solar, where that sends a flag to them to follow DOT. That was especially critical after the max obscuration to the end of the event, where solar could maybe in some cases produce a little more than what it's being dispatched, but it's following dispatch, kind of in making sure we go back to that dancing partner theme. Those were things that we can continue to expand on and get really efficient at.
Really good to think about next time, which I believe the next solar eclipse is scheduled for 2024. I don't think it's going to have as large of impact on the West, but it certainly will be something that we'll have to keep an eye on, but definitely for lessons learned. Jessica, any other thoughts about the post-eclipse analysis or lessons learned from your perspective?
I think it's so far just, getting into the data and seeing how our forecast performed has been really interesting. And also, I mentioned, it's critical to have the most accurate forecasts you can possibly have from the day ahead market all the way down to real time. So we're just analyzing the forecasts that we received from our vendors, taking a look at how they performed, and kind of analyzing the temperature forecast as well to see how they did. And then I think that'll also provide us good feedback and information to take back to the vendors and ways that we can try to improve things potentially for the next eclipse that's coming soon in October of 2020 or April of 2024.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Amber, any final thoughts there?
Yeah, there's all great things. A couple of final thoughts. So as the load forecaster for the California region, as well as all the WEIM partners, load forecasting was critical, just like the renewable components, whether it's feeding into that, of course. There's a lot of rooftop solar on the system. We talked about it a little bit at the beginning. We haven't talked about the growth as much and the impact. It really is impacting the demand forecast. I think one of the things that we observed, and will come out in the December report, is it's really critical to have the good rooftop solar forecast, just like the other pieces. We were able to try multiple model configurations during the eclipse. So we had one going downstream that was heavily monitored by the forecasting team, both in the day ahead perspective, but in real time, right? Most of the time when you get into the real time frame, all of our models, whether they be load models or they be renewable models, they're auto-regressive in nature. So they really like to look at that last point that happened, help form the forecast that's coming. Well, in an eclipse situation, when you're moving the solar so much, that auto-regressiveness is something that you don't want as much during those real-time timeframes. And I think that we had models in test during that time. We had models in production during that time. I think overall went really, really well, but we did see some lessons learned on the load forecasting side that we will put into place for the next eclipse that comes, and how to feed the rooftop solar variable into the model to ensure that at that point in time, you don't want the auto-regressive nature as much playing into it. So I think one of the things we saw in the challenges, it did really, really good on the way in. The way out, when you get from the part of the max obscuration to the full sun, is really where you saw some challenges in the forecasting methodologies. And that's really an opportunity for improvement for us, and some lessons learned that you'll see when the paper comes out.
Great.
The last thing
Yeah.
to touch on is the uncertainty requirements. So with this and any day, whether it be a partly cloudy day or a solar eclipse day, we have a lot more uncertainty on the system with weather-driven resources, right? And there was a lot of use in our uncertainty products during the eclipse. So in preparation, the regulation requirements that we carried, we heavily analyzed the 2017 eclipse to help inform what the regulation requirements needed to be. And that's to cover the uncertainty from that last market run to actual for operations to help with the control of the system. The other two that were utilized is the RUC, the day ahead uncertainty. So the day ahead uncertainty, we solve the market in an hourly granularity in the day ahead time frame. And that's really important when you have big ramps on the system. So the uncertainty requirement really helped us take the hourly average to the 5-minute level so that was within uncertainty. So the day ahead had the energy resources to be able to handle the granularity difference that it was going to experience during that morning time frame. I think that was really, really critical to the success of the day ahead market and the positioning of the resources. And then lastly, we have a real-time uncertainty product called the flexible ramp product and requirements that was there as well. So I think what you'll see as we evolve in the grid is really these uncertainty products are really critical to making sure that you have the resources there to handle whether it be a big ramp day or a partly cloudy day and you're ramping just for the clouds that are coming over or the wind that's coming in. They really did shine during the event.
It's all fascinating.
Back to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's super fascinating and something that will continue to evolve, I'm sure, over time. Well, I am reassured, as are, I think, all consumers in the West, that you are all working so hard on this, not only for these very unique events, but just for our day-to-day operations as well. Thank you for your work and participating in this version of the Energy Matters conversations. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Take care.